Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn. Welcome to today's video, which is another NetGalley ARC reading vlog. I am particularly excited for this one because I am reading the last books that I have on my NetGalley shelf for the remainder of the year. It is only 3 books, which is kind of surprising, but I've got 2 books that release in October to read and 1 book that releases in November. And once I get those 3 books read and reviewed, I will be good on my upcoming NetGalley ARCs until 2026. And I do have some 2026 books already on my NetGalley shelf that I've been approved for, but I'm probably not going to think about those until January. I am also excited for the books specifically within this vlog. They all have a very nice cover kind of color scheme. They're all kind of dark and moody looking, which I think is perfect for this time of year. So let's get right on into the books. The first one that I'll be reading for this video is called Remain by Nicholas Sparks in collaboration with M. Night Shyamalan. I am very excited and interested to see what this book is all about. From what I know, this is a paranormal romance of some sort, though I don't know the specifics of the plot. I think I've read one Nicholas Sparks book before. He is a very well-known romance author. He normally writes more in the contemporary romance genre, but many of his books have been adapted into movies, so you might know his books or movies like The Notebook, The Last Song. I think A Walk to Remember is Nicholas Sparks. The Longest Ride, Safe Haven, just so many romance books that have been adapted into movies. And M. Night Shyamalan, on the other hand, has not written any books that I am aware of, but he is a director and filmmaker of like thriller horror type movies, including like The Sixth Sense, I think is his most popular, but my favorite by him is the movie Old. He also recently did Trap, which was a movie that came out last year, and he did the movie adaptation of Knock at the Cabin, which is an adaptation of the book The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Oh yeah, he also did the Split movie series. He did The Village, so very well-known, but very different vibe from Nicholas Sparks, obviously. So I'm very curious to see what these 2 people have come up with together and how this story ends up going. And this book releases on October 14th. The next book that I'll be reading for this video is called Run Away With Me by J.L. Simmons. This one, on the complete other end of the spectrum, is a debut book. I've never heard of this author before. I also haven't heard anybody else talk about this book, but I saw the cover on NetGalley and was very intrigued. And then after reading the synopsis, figured it might be something that I enjoy. This appears to be a young adult kind of coming of age contemporary story about 2 girls who go onto a cross-country road trip together. I think it has an LGBTQIA romance within it and also somewhat of a kind of thriller element because I think they are somewhat on the run. This one also releases on October 14th. And then the third book that I'll be reading for this video does not come out until November 18th, but I'm super excited about it. It's called How Girls Are Made by Mindy McGinnis. Mindy McGinnis is one of my favorite young adult authors. She has written books including The Female of the Species, which might be her most popular and maybe a title you recognize, but I have also read her books Be Not Far From Me and Heroine. I've given her 5 stars in the past, so I have very high hopes about this book. This also appears to be a young adult contemporary book that I think has something to do with like the dangers of social media. I don't know much beyond that, but super excited to give this author another go and to see how this book turns out. So that's the plan. I will check in with updates as I read through these books and let you know all of my thoughts along with some more detailed synopses of the books in case you want to know a little bit more what they're about. But I'm gonna go ahead and get started and I'll be back with my first reading update when I have it. Okay, my friends, here with my first update because I am not quite halfway into Remain. I think I'm about 40% into the book and I want to check in and tell you a little bit about how it's going. I obviously expressed in the intro of this video I have been so excited for this book and I don't really know why, but something about these 2 people collaborating on a book together just sounded really exciting to me. So I'm excited that I'm finally reading it and I have to say it's going pretty well. And I wanted to update before I got to the halfway point, mostly because I went into this book extremely blind. I think all I knew about it is that it's a supernatural romance or a paranormal romance or something like that, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how like supernatural we were talking. I had no preconceived notions or expectations, and it's been fun going into this book with that. and being completely open. So when I talk about this book, I don't want to give too much away because it's been fun to discover that along the way, but also this is a reading vlog. I'm assuming that not everybody is going to be completely hooked and want to pick this book up based on the author collaboration alone. So I'll do my best to kind of balance the two. But this book is about our main character named Tate. And Tate is I think he's 38 years old. He's a 38-year-old man, and he is an architect. And at the beginning of this book, he is traveling to Cape Cod. That is the setting of the book. He's traveling there to meet up with one of his like childhood best friends, who he's known forever, to design a vacation home for this best friend. Because he's super rich, he has a wife and 5 kids, so they need this massive home. So our main character, Tate, is going to design it for him. However, Tate has had a very rocky last few years. He's really had a pretty rocky life. He lost his parents at a pretty young age, and then he had one sister who he was really close to, and within the past few years, his sister passed away. This is all relevant, and this is all what I would consider the non-spoilery territory. But basically, after the loss of his sister, Tate went into a really dark, depressive place, and he actually was checked into a psychiatric hospital for quite a long period of time, and now he has recently been checked out of that. So he's just coming out of his, depression. He's still grieving, he's still healing, and he's getting back onto his feet with this architecture project. So that sets the scene, and that is really what's described in the first portion of this book. I have to say, it makes a lot of sense how this book is written because it feels like a movie. It feels like I'm reading the description of a movie, and it's so clearly picturable in my head that, again, it just makes a lot of sense given who these authors are. And with that, I definitely think some readers will read this book, or they'll start this book and they'll say it's extremely boring because not a lot happens plot-wise. Like, that whole setup I said is basically the plot that sets up, the romance that is to come. But like, that's all that's happened so far is the first few meetings between Tate and his friend talking about this house. So it's very descriptive, somewhat slow moving. I am intrigued though. There's just something keeping me going. And then I'll say the other part of the plot, the only other thing that's happened is that Tate is staying at this old bed and breakfast. Since he's not from Cape Cod, he's not from the area. He's staying at this bed and breakfast that also has its own, history to it. And he meets someone there that is the romantic person, the love interest. He meets this woman. And this is the part where, like, I guess if you don't really want to know anything more about the book before going in, then I would consider this like the mildest of spoilers. So I'll put up a spoiler warning so that you can skip past this section if you really want to know almost nothing about like the speculative elements of the book. Then I will give you the chance to do that. So mute me or skip forward until the mild spoilers warning goes away. But in case you just want to know like what is the setup of the romance of this book and how is it like a speculative romance or a paranormal romance, basically Tate checks into this bed and breakfast and he's told that he has the whole place to himself. It's this big like 6-bedroom house or something like that. He thinks he's the only one staying there when one morning he wakes up and there's another woman in the living room. She's doing yoga. She's completely made herself at home. He strikes up a conversation with her. He's pretty attracted to her initially. And after a few conversations with her and then with the like groundskeepers of the bed and breakfast, he realizes that he is the only guest staying there, and yet she keeps showing up. He eventually comes to the realization or the assumption that she is a ghost because she is the spitting image of someone who died 2 years ago. So that's the part that really makes it make sense in terms of who these two authors are, or who this author and filmmaker are, and why they're collaborating together, because we're getting the romance of Nicholas Sparks, and most of it feels very generic and like something I've seen before. Like, I'm 100% sure I've watched a Hallmark movie before of a man who stays at a bed and breakfast and falls in love with a ghost. Like, I can picture the movie cover. That exists, and that story alone is not that interesting to me. But then there's the M. Night Shyamalan portion of it where we get some kind of gruesome scenes or like visions that Tate is getting that we are assuming has something to do with how this woman died. And so I'm assuming that's going to become kind of more of the central mystery of this book, is figuring out what happened to her and like solving the question of how our main character is gonna get to be with this woman. But it's pretty creepy when those parts happen. And I am just holding out hope that that part of the book becomes even more prevalent and like more creepy things happen. And I'm really holding out for an M. Night Shyamalan twist. I don't know if this is me holding too high of expectations for this book, if that's not the intention or what, I don't know, but there's just something in me that wants to keep reading this book to get to the root of why M. Night Shyamalan wanted to write this story. Because without that like creepy, thrillery, psychological element to it, again, it's just that cookie cutter, like man falls in love with a ghost romance story that I've seen before. So I don't know, I am intrigued. And that's where I will cut off like the mild spoilery part, just saying that I am intrigued. I can't say I would like rave about this book so far. It has to have a pretty specific ending and payoff for me to fully justify a super high rating or anything. But at this point, 40% in the book, I want to get back to reading it. I am interested and invested and holding out hope that it's going to do something super interesting by the end of the book that I'm going to love. We'll see if that happens. I will obviously come back and tell you my thoughts after I finish the book without spoilers, but it will kind of relay whether or not I feel like this book is worth reading given the hype and popularity of the two people collaborating on writing the book. Like, it has to be worth it to make itself such a spectacle, in my opinion. So I'll tell you if it does that. But yeah, I'm gonna get back to reading it, and like I said, I'm really excited to do so. So I think I'm gonna just go ahead and fly through the rest of this book, and I'll be back with my final thoughts once I am finished. Okay, I have no makeup on, my hair's greasy. I should probably wait and come back to do this update at another time, but I literally just finished Remain, and I just have to talk about it. I am so disappointed, and I feel like I have so many thoughts and reasons why I'm disappointed. But first and foremost is obviously I had built this book up a lot in my head. Not really because I expected it to be a certain thing, but just because Nicholas Sparks and M. Night Shyamalan are such prolific writers that I figured what they would do together would be good. Like, I assumed I would be impressed by it, but even if I didn't enjoy it, I figured it would do something. Like, it would be original in some way. It would be something new that none of us had read before. And even if it wasn't to my taste, I figured there had to be a reason that these two people collaborated. But I just finished this book and it was so underwhelming. Because first of all, I've read this story before. I've read romances like this before. I've read mystery thrillers like this before. I've read supernatural books that do this exact thing before. Nothing about it felt new or original or anything, and that sucks. Coming from Nicholas Sparks, who has written like genre-defining books like The Notebook. Like, I think some people love romance books and movies because of The Notebook. It did something new and so addicting that you just like cannot help but, I've only watched the movie, but I feel like you just can't help but watch that movie and cry for those characters and like how the whole arc happens from like the very beginning to the very end and the characters that you come to know as intertwined. That was something new and genre defining. M. Night Shyamalan, similarly, but in a totally different genre, has come to be known for such iconic movies and twists and reveals and explanations that are mind-blowing and, again, I'll say genre defining. But this book was just like so within the lines of what you would expect from this type of story. I was not surprised by anything, and that's so sad. And with that, I feel like I can talk about the book a little bit more freely actually, because I was originally afraid of giving too much away, because I figured there would be something to give away. But now I feel like maybe it's in a backwards way a spoiler to say, but there's nothing to give away because there's nothing surprising about this book, and that's so disappointing. It's also a little strange now looking back and deciding for myself how I want to like pitch this book and talk about this book, because it's not a romance. And I say that cautiously. Really, I mean to say that for the people who are romance readers who like to stick within the definition of romance. If you catch my drift, this is, I guess, a paranormal love story or a supernatural love story, but it's not a romance. So then the next closest thing, I guess, would be describing it as a mystery thriller, because the mystery part of the book really does become the bulk of the book, especially in the second half. The main character is really focused on solving the mystery. If you watched the mild spoilers section from before, I think I kind of alluded to it there. So like, that's the mystery being solved. But as an avid mystery thriller reader, I predicted exactly what was going on. And I don't say that flippantly. Like, I'm not the type of mystery thriller reader to be like, I knew exactly what was happening. I predicted every twist and reveal. Normally I don't care. If it's well written, well crafted, I'm okay with seeing it coming. But honestly, most of the time I don't see it coming, because usually I'm just absorbing the story as it comes. But this one, I had no choice but to make a guess, because there were only so many endings that it could have been, and like, it was just so obvious what was happening. So this is not a mystery thriller book that I would recommend to other mystery thriller readers, because I don't think you're going to get anything out of it either. And then the last piece that I guess would be enticing to people is like the supernatural portion of it, sort of verging on horror at times, because it is very creepy, but it definitely does not take up enough of the book to pitch this book to horror readers. So I'm just left really underwhelmed and confused about how this book is possibly going to be marketed to anybody who's actually going to enjoy it. And that is so harsh, but I also feel like it's deserved criticism, because even after reading the author's note at the end of this book, it's written by Nicholas Sparks, and he basically says that obviously he's a romance writer, but he's always dreamed of writing a supernatural romance or something verging onto mystery thriller territory, and he's a particular fan of like horror movies, and particularly M. Night Shyamalan. So his connections basically connected him with Night, and he was so excited to make this happen with one of his idols, and he called it something. He called it like a groundbreaking collaboration or something like that. And I'm just like, breaking what ground? This was so, I don't want to call it boring, because I am gonna give it 2 stars, because at the very least it read like a movie, and I actually really enjoyed the experience of reading all of the descriptions and feeling like I could picture everything, and it did make me want to keep reading it because it was so easy to read. So again, I don't want to say it was boring, it was just so underwhelming. So I sadly would not recommend this book. That honestly is making me teeter towards like a 1-star rating, but I don't know, 2 stars feels right, but it's basically an anti-recommendation. I wouldn't recommend it. And if anybody wants to know like spoilers about the book, I would be happy to message you about it. Feel free to message me on Instagram or somewhere and ask me for the full plot of this book, and I'd be happy to tell you, because sometimes I like to know spoilers of books that I want to know what happens without spending the time to read it to find out what happens. I don't know, maybe that's you with this book. I would be happy to tell you so that you don't waste your time, but you know what it's about. But otherwise, if you had no interest, you can safely skip this one and you will be just fine. So that's a real bummer. I really hope that the next 2 books in this video are better than this one. I'm gonna move right on to the next one. I think it's the one called Run Away With Me. So I'll be back, hopefully looking a little bit more put together with a bit of a summary about that one, or at least an initial synopsis once I get into it when I have it. Okay, me again with an impromptu, another update, because I might have to eat some of my words that I just said. I don't know, still a little undetermined, but it's come to my attention that there also is a movie being made for Remain. And now I'm thinking this whole collaboration might be a little bit different than I was thinking originally, because an overview of the movie that I'm reading online says Remain is an upcoming American supernatural romantic thriller film written, directed, and produced by M. Night Shyamalan. It is based on an idea he conceived with Nicholas Sparks, who separately wrote the novel version of the same story. So that makes me think that Nicholas Sparks and M. Night Shyamalan must have met. and talked about this idea for this like genre bending story, but maybe they didn't map out the whole plot together. Maybe they decided, okay, Nicholas Sparks, you're gonna go write the book version of this. I, M. Night Shyamalan, am going to go make the movie version, and maybe we're going to see them be pretty different. Like, it looks like the main storyline is the same. A grieving architect moves to Cape Cod for work after leaving a psychiatric facility. While staying at a historic B&B, he meets a mysterious woman who makes him question his rational beliefs about life and loss. So that is exactly what I explained at the very beginning of the book. Maybe they took things in different directions. I'm not sure. And to be honest, I'm going to have to revisit my thoughts on this book after watching this movie, which unfortunately it does not come out until October of 2026. So that's where I'm not fully eating my words yet, because all of my opinions on the book still stand. However, my surprise at these two minds not coming up with something mind-blowing in book format might change based on whether the movie is better than the book. And if that's the case, I don't know, then I guess I'll have to say this collaboration was a better idea than I thought, but still my thoughts on the book are going to remain the same, I think. It's just who is responsible for that. Is it only Nicholas Sparks, or is it both him and M. Night Shyamalan? I don't know, to be determined. If anybody else has done research on this situation and has more information than that, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to just keep my eye out for more information about this. I don't know if there are any like interviews with either of them or anything. Especially with this book coming out in 2 weeks, I could see Nicholas Sparks doing some press around it. If he's someone who does press, I don't know. But yeah, all that to say, more to come. I am hopeful for this movie. If M. Night Shyamalan got to have more control over the movie version, again, I can see him doing more with it from like a twist and plotline perspective, but we'll see. So yeah, that's my random update that I didn't know I was gonna make, but I thought I would pop in and say that in case anybody watching this is not interested in the book after I talked about it, but would be interested in a similar movie, or if you see news about like this movie coming out in a year once you've forgotten about this book, maybe me saying this will help it connect better in your mind and you can just know what's going on a little bit more with this collaboration. But that is very interesting. All right, my camera battery is now flashing at me, so I'm gonna get to charging that and also get to reading like I mentioned. Okay, bye. Okay, I'm back with my next update. I went ahead and finished, what is the book even called? Run Away With Me. And it's actually been a couple of days since I finished this book, and a lot of the details have already left my brain, which I feel like is indicative of my thoughts about this book, which are that for me, this was like the most 3-star of a 3-star book, which is a bummer. I feel like a lot of us readers would rather either have a 5-star book or a 1-star book, meaning we'd rather have something passionate to say about a book, even if it's not a 5-star book, even if it's not something we absolutely love. Sometimes it's better to have like a 1-star book that we really passionately disliked and want to say things about, rather than a 3-star book where we feel like it was just meh. And that's how I feel about this book. I feel like it was just meh. I feel like I don't have much to say about it. What this book is about, this is a young adult contemporary book with kind of a mystery thriller element to it. Because it follows 2 teenage girls. I'm gonna be completely honest, I don't even remember if it follows both of their perspectives or just one. I think it's just one. I think we follow our main character, who I just had to look up her name, Jessie, who goes by the nickname Mouse, and she is a high school student. And at the very beginning of this book, it starts off like the very first chapter with her kind of fleeing her house in a very frantic state. And she has in her mind that she needs to get to the bus station and she needs to get out of town and go somewhere far away from where she lives. And where she lives is the Pacific Northwest, I want to say Seattle. So she's trying to get anywhere but there. And as she's fleeing her house, she comes out to the street and this Mustang pulls up with one of her classmates who she doesn't really know that well, but she does know who she is. It's this popular girl named Brooke. And Brooke pulls up and she says, "Hey, you look like you need to get out of here. Do you need a ride?" And Mouse is like, "Perfect, I'll just have her take me to the bus station." But then these two set off on this cross-country road trip together. They're both fleeing things in their lives, and it's basically equally about us finding out if they do that, and like the mystery thriller element is figuring out what they're fleeing from and if they're going to make it away from that. And equal parts like a contemporary kind of coming of age book about these two girls and who they are, and also kind of their relationship together. It doesn't really start out that way. There's a bit of an element of coming to sexuality because Mouse is queer and she thinks Brooke is straight. We learn that Brooke is somewhat queer also, so there's kind of a romance that buds throughout the book, but it's more about them just like getting to know a classmate that they don't know that well. And as always, realizing that, you know, they have more in common than they thought. Let's see, what kind of thoughts do I have about this book? I did really like that it started out getting right into the action. Like first chapter, she's getting in the car and they're on the road. That to me is a plus. I'd rather have that than a whole bunch of like build up, and for being pitched as a road trip book, like not getting to the actual road trip until halfway through. That's not what this book does. But because it gets into that action so quickly, it does kind of gloss over the context about why these girls are on the road. And I think that's intentional because you are finding that out through the book, but it makes it hard to be initially on board with how high the stakes are for these two girls, because they leave everything behind. Like they're not in contact with their parents or any other friends or anybody that they know in their hometown. They're literally trying to like get rid of their phones so they're not being tracked. And it's kind of like, okay, you guys are high school teenage girls. Like what could be so bad that this is your reaction? And you don't find out what it is until much later into the book. I will say the synopsis of this book does give away at least the main character's motivation. So I actually don't think I would recommend reading that if you think that part of it would be intriguing to you, to not find out until way later in the book, because it's not explained to us until at least halfway. So I feel like that's the trade-off of getting right into the action, is that there's not that context setting portion of the book. So you kind of just have to be along for the ride and trust that you will get your answers later, but don't ask questions up front. Just let the book do what it wants to do. And other than that, I feel like that's all I really have to say about the book. I can't say that anything in the reveals were so mind-blowing that I felt a huge payoff by the end of the book. And I also, despite the fact that there are some emotional topics covered within this book, I did not feel very emotionally invested in these characters, which I would prefer to feel, especially in a young adult coming of age type of book. I find that I love the ones that I really deeply connect to on an emotional level, because I kind of feel like that's what those books are for. Like they're for either young adults to read and feel a deep connection to and maybe learn or discover something about themselves. Or for me as an adult, I like to read it to like put myself back in the mindset of being that young. I think it helps me with, you know, empathy towards young people around me. And also just getting to know people and situations that are different from my own that I can empathize with on a deeper level. That's what I like in books, and I just was missing that in this one. So like I said at the start of this clip, I'm gonna give it 3 stars. I don't think the book itself is bad or did anything wrong, but it also wasn't great, and it's not one that I will recommend to that many people going forward, I don't think. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and get into the 3rd book for this vlog, which I'm really hoping will have that deeper emotional pull, because it's How Girls Are Made by Mindy McGinnis, and this is an author that I know can do depth. She can do some deep emotional female feelings, and I am ready for it. So I'll be back with that update when I have it. Not sure if it will be partway through the book or at the end of the book. Kind of depends on how many thoughts I have as I am reading the book. So I'll be back soon with that next update. Alrighty friends, I am here with my next update. I'm all bundled up because it's suddenly transformed into fall outside, so it's very cold in my house. And I'm here to give my next update on How Girls Are Made. And it's a midway update, mostly because it is taking me so long to get through this book. And I don't know why. It's not because I'm not interested. I think it's just the fact that it's an ebook that I don't have an audio copy of because it's not released yet, and I don't find myself with a lot of time for physical reading, so it's just taking me a while. But I am currently at 33% of the way through this book, so I thought I'd come on and just pitch the initial premise of the book and give some of my really early initial thoughts. This is a young adult contemporary book that follows 3 different high school girls' perspectives. We've got Shelby, we've got Fallon, and we've got Joby. And they are all friends or acquaintances of each other. They go to the same high school, and they all get connected when one day something happens to Shelby, who is actually a fighter. I don't really know what it's called when you're in high school, but it's some sort of like UFC fighter adjacent thing. So she's super tough. And one day when she's at school, she gets punched in the face by her boyfriend. So that's kind of the inciting incident for this entire book. That's like the first chapter, is that scene happening. And then we see some fallout from that. And then basically what happens as a result is these 3 girls come together and they decide to start this club that's all about like empowering their fellow female students and having a safe space to discuss things like domestic violence, and then also going into like women's health and wellness, and then also talking about sex and STDs and pregnancy and preventing those latter 2 things, and then also touching on social media, because this book is set in present day. Social media and how you are perceived is such a top of mind issue for these girls, and they talk about that, and one of the girls I think is about to go down kind of a bad road related to desperation on social media. So it's a really interesting premise for a book because it seems like it's about to tackle a lot. But I do like that it's focusing on those 3 girls because we're going to get 3 very different perspectives because they're all so different. Like Shelby is the super tough fighter, but she's got all kinds of, you know, internal insecurities, and also her identity is kind of being put into check because she did get punched in the face by her boyfriend. So like the tough girl got beat. And then Joby is the one who I think is spiraling into social media because she has always been the cute friend in the group. She's never been any guy's like first choice, but now she kind of wants to be, so she's gonna spiral down that direction. And then Fallon is kind of the glue between both of those. She's always been Joby's best friend, and now she's connected with Shelby after this fight incident, and she's the one really leading this like girls group that they're starting at school. So I'm not sure what her story is going to be yet, but she definitely makes sense as a main character and will have a different experience than the other 2 girls. So I'm really interested to see where else this book goes and how deep it gets into these conversations. This book is feeling really similar to me as Heroine, which is by the same author, and this is my favorite book by Mindy McGinnis. I've read, I think, 3 books total, but this book is about a high school softball player who becomes addicted to her painkillers and goes down a really dangerous path related to drugs after an injury in her sport. And I'm seeing the same sort of formula being applied from this book to How Girls Are Made, because again, it's about that same like spiral, just different specific topics. But I love how she wrote this book because it was so raw and gritty and realistic. And I could relate to this book on so many levels. As a high school athlete, I also happened to play fast pitch softball, so I totally related to that. And also just growing up as a high school girl, all the pressures around you. What I didn't relate to was the injury and the addiction to drugs, but I loved getting that perspective because it felt very realistic and the type of thing that's like, it didn't happen to me, but I could see how it could, or how it could happen to somebody. And so I think I'm going to get the same thing with this book. Just the idea of like, none of these girls are me. Maybe being in high school today, like it could have been me. And as somebody with a daughter, it seems extremely relevant to me to think about these types of things and like how there are different dangerous paths to go down these days related to social media and addiction to social media, or addiction to validation from social media. Also just the connection with so many more people through social media. Like it seems important for me to be aware of all of that so that I can help mitigate some of that and be the voice for my daughter, or be like the sounding board for my daughter, so that she doesn't necessarily have to form a group like this in this book, because I can imagine there's going to be some problematic things that come out of teenage girls learning from other teenage girls who don't have all of the answers. So I don't know. All that to say, I'm enjoying this book. I'm very curious to see where else it's going to go. It has the seeds of a book that I could really, really love. So I'm hoping it continues going in that direction. I'm hoping I'm able to get through this book quickly, because I was hoping to get this video out last Friday and now it's Wednesday, so a lot of extra days have passed, and I want to move on to the rest of my October TBR, many of which have audiobooks, so I can cruise through them faster. But yeah, all that to say, I'm gonna get back to reading. I will be back probably with my final update once I finish this book, can give my final thoughts, and wrap up all of these arcs. Alrighty, I'm here with my final update. I finished How Girls Are Made, and I'm a little bit speechless at the moment. Mostly because the ending of this book is just like an absolute sucker punch. This book gets very dark towards the end, which I was expecting, given that I've read multiple books by this author before, and she really knows how to just inject that like rawness and emotion and just like unforgiving amount of pain and sadness through her characters, and I loved it. I have to give this book 5 stars. As I was reading this book, the thing that just kept running through my mind is that this book reminded me of an episode of Degrassi. And if you watch Degrassi, then you might agree with what I'm gonna talk about and how I'm gonna describe this book and how I would describe the show of Degrassi. But basically, it's a little bit over the top, and it's a little bit over dramatic, and it feels a little bit unrealistic. Because they're teenagers, it just feels like a little bit beyond what is believable for your average teenage high school student to get into. But it's doing that to make a point, and the point that it's making is just so poignant, and I think such a valuable lesson and like set of perspectives to read from, that it's worth it, and it's so good. Like, I think anyone who watched Degrassi and who liked the show of Degrassi would agree. Like, was it over the top? Yes. But was it just addicting? Yes. Because it was showing realistic teenagers going through really difficult, realistic situations that, while your average person might not go through them, some people do. And it's worthwhile seeing just like how extreme a situation can get in order to teach the lessons that you want to teach, whether it's how to avoid that type of situation or just be more aware so you can be empathetic, like whatever it is. I just saw a lot of parallels. I could even picture the characters as characters from Degrassi. Like, I think I told you this book follows 3 perspectives, and I could just picture in my head Fallon, who's the character that just seems to have it all together, or who is trying so hard to have it all together. She is Holly J. And then there's Joby, who's a little bit more interested in how she looks and how she's perceived by boys. Obviously, she's not just a surface level person, but the character of Joby I could so clearly picture as Emma. And then the character of Shelby, who is like this tough girl who puts on this facade like nobody can get through her or get to her. And I picture Shelby as Paige from Degrassi. So if you like those characters, then maybe you could picture them the same way in this book and enjoy this book. If that kind of overly angsty, overly dramatic, super dark and emotional towards the end type of thing interests you. I also think it's important to give some trigger warnings for this book, because it does really go there. So some topics that are covered in this book are attempted suicide, rape, sexual assault, sexual abuse, domestic violence, and it's worth knowing right away that one of the important characters dies. And that's also something that happens at the very beginning. Like, there's a prologue sort of scene where you find out that someone in the town has died, and then that kind of, we flash into that sort of present day a few times throughout the book, but you don't find out who it is, who died, or what happened or anything until the very end. But yeah, it's definitely a very dark, gritty, emotional book, and I do really appreciate kind of what it touched on in terms of the dangers of social media, and especially nowadays when like, you really don't know who you're talking to online. Like, we all have seen catfished, and yet so many people still fall victim to it all the time. And at the same time, even if you're not talking specifically to one person, if you're posting on social media, you're still opening yourself up to some dangerous individuals. Just the idea of like being traced or being tracked and somebody being able to find you based on what you post on social media, that's a scary concept. And I think that all of us are aware of that. Like sometimes it takes a book like this to make you not just say, yeah, I know the dangers are out there, but to really think about, you know, what you're doing, what your digital footprint is, and just making sure you have some sense of awareness raised so that you're as careful as possible. And just, yeah, there are so many rabbit holes to fall into, especially young people in high school who are so impressionable and who are so caught up in like the drama of high school and ego and fear of parents or authority figures like stopping people from speaking up or doing the right safe thing because of fear of consequences. Just some really good nuggets of information in here. So that's all I'll say on it. I'm so happy to have another 5-star book from Mindy McGinnis. I don't think this one has surpassed Heroine as my favorite from her, but it definitely has even more so solidified her as an author that I'll keep on my radar. I'll pick up more books from her, and that is very exciting. So I think that is all I have for this video. Let me know if any of these books that I read in this video sound intriguing to you. If you plan to pick any of them up once they are released, I would love to hear. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.